Hello, I'm Jordan Johnson and welcome to the Chat Cancer podcast, the place to have open, honest and engaging conversations about cancer. We're thrilled to be collaborating with Warrington Voluntary Action and the Cheshire Merseyside Cancer Alliance to bring you insights, experiences and support around cancer care. Today we're chatting about an important cancer screening that many of us have got experiences of and opinions on, and that's cervical screenings. Now, these screenings used to be called smear tests, which is a phrase that people might be a little bit more familiar with. But today we're going to share what that cervical screening procedure involves, explore associated stigmas, and try and ease any concerns that someone might have. Our plan is to empower more people to take control of their health and attend these screenings, which for some can be a life-saving choice. As always, we're keeping things informal and friendly with our fantastic live audience here at Mama's Bakery in Warrington. Welcome, everyone. Okay. Cervical screenings play a massive role in early detection in the UK. Women and anyone with a cervix or those registered as female within their GP between the ages of 25 and 64 are invited to the NHS cervical screening programme every 3 to 5 years. However, research shows that uptake among younger women remains relatively low. In this episode of Chat Cancer, we're discussing the important cervical screening process and some common concerns that people might have, because let's be real, it's completely normal to feel a little bit uneasy about these screenings, and we want to provide clear information and ease any worries you might have so you can feel much more confident and informed when you're attending that screening. Yeah. And joining me in this particular episode is Steph from Woolston in Warrington. Hi. She is 36 years old and a social media director. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today, Steph.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. So first and foremost, can I ask you what made you want to come on the Chat Cancer podcast and why these screenings are so important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things that we don't like talking about.
No.
Some of the stuff that kind of gets discussed is talked around. We talk around it rather than talk about it. And I'm not backwards in coming forward. So I thought, why not use that to my advantage? Definitely. And to everyone's advantage. And just have a chat.
And what a better podcast to start chatting on than Chat
Cancer. Fantastic.
So while listeners can get a little bit of a background on you, Steph, How long have you been attending your cervical screenings?
So I got my first letter when I was in my mid-20s. And my first letter came through to me really clear, you've come of age. Made me feel really old. You've come of age and you need to start attending your screenings. Yeah. Really straightforward letter, very kind of, just from my GP, and nice clear instructions of how to kind of book it. So we're talking 10 plus years. I don't know why I did that. I literally said my age earlier, didn't we? So we know how old I am.
Keep it under wraps.
Yeah, it was very mysterious. So 10 plus years I've been been attending the screenings.
Oh, thank you so much, Steph. And again, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
Before we start, I'm just going to quickly define cervical cancer, just so that we're all on the same page in terms of what it actually is. Steph, are you happy to share any information you might have around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So cervical cancer is cancer that's found anywhere in the cervix, which is the opening between the vagina and the womb. It's most common in women aged between 30 and 35, but it can happen at any age. So nearly all cervical cancers are caused by an infection which comes from a certain type of human papillomavirus, or HPV for short. High-risk HPV can cause cervical cells to become abnormal, and virtually all cases of cervical cancer are linked to high-risk HPV. Now, a cervical screening is not a test for cancer. Let's make that clear right now. Mm-hmm. It is a test to look for HPV. And if HPV is found, further tests will then look for abnormal cervical cells. So it's important because if it's left untreated, those abnormal cells might develop into cancer, and we can reduce the rate by attending a cervical screening, which aims to find and treat the changes to the cells before they turn into cancer.
And although in this episode we are focusing on that early detection of cervical cancer by attending these screenings, I do think it's mindful to share the symptoms of cervical cancer.
Absolutely.
Which are unusual vaginal bleeding, pain or discomfort during sex, vaginal discharge, pain in the area between the hip bones or your pelvis, And not everyone diagnosed with cervical cancer will have these symptoms. That's why it's so important to attend the regular cervical screening. Because if you're listening to this podcast and you're showing any of these symptoms, please make an appointment with your local GP as soon as possible to get them checked out.
Yeah, agreed.
So, Steph, taking it back to cervical screenings and trying to catch the possibility of cervical cancer as early as we can. Can we talk through the process?
Let's do it.
Let's go.
I love that. Let's do it.
Let's go. So, starting with step one is that patient invitation, isn't it?
Yeah.
And first of all, it's worth mentioning again, you do need to be registered with your GP to get your invitations. And women in the UK between the ages of 25 to 64 are routinely invited to take part in the NHS screening programme every 3 to 5 years. And if you're over 65 and you've never had a cervical screening, you can ask your GP for a test. You don't have to wait for that letter in the post or think that you're not eligible anymore. It's also important to note that screenings are also for anyone in those age ranges with a cervix, such as trans men and non-binary people who were assigned female at birth. So, Steph, how do you normally receive your screening invitation?
So I receive mine via letter, which comes to my address. As you said earlier, I'm registered with my GP to get those kind of reminders to let me know that I'm due. But one thing that we actually, when I say we, my group of friends do, which is, I think, really, it's so simple but also quite important, is when one of us receives our letter from our GP to remind us to go for a screening, we pop it in our WhatsApp group. Pop it in our WhatsApp group and let them know that let whoever know that we've had our letter. Have you had yours? Book your screen. Because it's another reminder. And you're talking about it amongst you. You go, oh, yes, I forgot to book mine. I'll do mine now. Or, oh, I did. I went last week. Have you been for yours? Yeah, I'll go for mine. It's just that kind of, friend on friend. So officially, the GP does send me a letter. I do get a letter. But unofficially, I've got 12 women reminding me on a cycle.
You've got that peer pressure.
We've got the peer pressure. It works. It works.
It's whatever works, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Absolutely. Get exactly that. Yeah.
So once you've got that invitation, you put it in your friend group.
Yeah. Take a picture, send it to everybody else.
Exactly. What does the actual invitation say?
It's really clear. It is just a very, very clear kind of quick invitation that explains how cervical screening can prevent cancer. And then you've got just some instructions on how to get the appointment booked. However it is that you need to book that appointment, it'll all be there in that letter for you.
For anyone that maybe not sure or maybe hasn't had that letter before, how would you actually go about booking the appointment?
It depends entirely on the service that you're using and your GP, but usually a really quick phone call will do it for you. You can head onto the NHS app. I believe they do book appointments on there now. A lot of the time it is done in your GP's office. So nice and simple. You're not going out of your way. We're in Warrington. If anyone, is wondering, we're actually here. So I've always had mine at the Orford Jubilee Medical Centre. So even though my GP's actually in Woolston, I've gone to there. But again, really straightforward, dead simple. Phone call through the NHS app, and then they'll kind of send you the information where you need to go, who you need to speak to, where what you need to be doing.
Nice and simple.
Yeah, really straightforward.
So once you've received that invitation and you've made that booking, how do you tend to feel?
I think this one's always a tough one because I think as women we kind of dread it a little bit. It's not the most comfortable of situations to be in, is it?
No.
So I think the actual booking it bit is where you kind of get that trepidation of going into an appointment and having to do what you need to do, which we'll go into in a moment. And having that kind of anxiety about maybe feeling a little bit exposed, maybe feeling a little bit uncomfortable. It is in that kind of build up. However, I think once it's booked, it does make you feel a little bit less of those feelings. Because it's important that you go and that you do it. And I think as soon as it's booked, you kind of think, well, I'm going now. So
got no choice.
Yeah, I've got the appointment booked, so we might as well just get it over and done with. And it's worth it.
Yeah.
So you know. But yeah, anxiety, bit of trepidation, a bit nerves, but we're all right. We'll get there. We'll get through it.
I'm pretty sure most people that are listening can relate to that feeling.
I bet that most people in this room can relate to that, let alone.
Because once you've made that appointment, I suppose the next step is that actual screening itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I know you mentioned before that you tend to do your screenings at Orford Jubilee Hub.
Yes.
But there's plenty of places around Warrington if you are Warrington based.
Absolutely.
So if we could give someone that was listening that maybe hasn't been to one of these screenings before a little bit of an idea.
Yeah.
What happens when you first go into that room where that screening takes place?
The first time I went was a slightly different experience to my, the kind of experiences that I've had afterwards.
Yeah.
So the first time I was quite young. I think I was maybe 25 or 26 when I first kind of did my very first screening. And I was really nervous because at the time, being 25, 26 years old, we didn't really have these conversations with women. No. This has only happened, our WhatsApp group about these kind of things has only happened as we've got into our 30s and not a single one of us cares anymore.
Exactly.
So we'll talk about anything. But the first time I went, I was very nervous, and the nurses, God bless them, were so wonderful with me. They gave me kind of really clear information about kind of what was going to happen, what I needed to do, what the procedure was. And they were really open and honest. You know, it might be a little bit uncomfortable. It might be, you might feel a little bit of pain, but, you know, not everybody does. They were just really, really open, and they were quite happy to answer any questions that I might have. Yeah. And also take the Michael out of me, because they said, if you feel pain now, you've got tattoos all over your feet. So I was like, all right, okay, yeah. All right, understood. And like I said, they're really easy to talk to. So if you just let them know that you're a bit nervous, they're more than happy to hold your hand. In fact, I think I've even had one where a nurse came in and held my hand while somebody else did it. That was when I had my colposcopy. So it was, we'll go into that in a bit anyway. But they were so lovely. The test itself is literally a minute or two. It's not very long. You do tend to need to kind of remove your clothes from like the waist down. Yeah. So, I mean, you can always wear a skirt, but they will ask you to remove kind of your underwear. Yeah. And I think sometimes that's where you kind of feel a little bit uncomfortable.
Feel exposed, isn't it?
Yes, exposed. It's a great word for it. What tends to happen is they'll ask you to lie back on a kind of bed. Yeah. I think is probably the best way to do it. And then you'll have your knees drawn up and spread apart, which again, very exposing and not the most comfortable of positions to be in.
Not the most dignified.
Great, yes. No, very, yes. If this position is difficult, you can lie on your side with your knees drawn up as well, and the nurses can work on either side of you then. Yeah. But yeah, that tends to be what happens during the appointment.
Once you're in that position, very ladylike, very demure position.
Very demure.
Then the nurse will use something called a speculum, along with a really soft brush, to take samples of the cells from your cervix. Can you talk us through that side of it, Steph?
Yeah, absolutely. So the nurse will gently kind of slide a plastic instrument called the speculum into the vagina to view the cervix. A soft brush is used to take sample of cells from the cervix's surface. The samples are placed into a pot to be sent to the laboratory, and the nurse removes the speculum, completing the test. And then you can get dressed and go home.
Go on your merry way.
On your merry way.
So if you were to think about that kind of scenario as a whole, how quick is it from when you get on the bed till you're getting off?
Yeah, I mean, it is a couple of minutes. It's really not... it is not a long appointment at all. Yeah. I think the build-up is probably worse. A lot of the time, that kind of build-up and the internal kind of thought process can be a bit worse than the actual, treatment and thing. It's the procedure itself.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think it doesn't matter how many times you go, does it? You're still in your brain going, this is going to be horrendous. Yeah. 6 hours.
Exactly. You just don't. Yeah, I think we, like I say, we build these things up in our head, and in the end, it actually is. It's a lot more straightforward than what we can probably maybe give ourselves credit for.
So how are you feeling throughout that process? I know it's super quick, but there must be things going through your mind.
Yeah. I think being real, like I mentioned earlier, when I first had my very first smear test, I got I think it was the positive result for HPV, and when I got back, it was quite severe.
Yeah.
And so that first test that I'd had done, the test itself was absolutely fine, but then I had to go through the treatment, which is completely different and completely not what we're talking about today. But in my head, I've always had that kind of anxiety and that build up of, oh gosh, what if it happens again?
Yeah.
But then the logic side of me still goes, yes, what if it happens again and you don't go to your screening?
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So from a treatment point of view, it's nice. It's not nice. Take that back. It's absolutely not a nice situation to be in necessarily. However, it's necessary. And I think the actual procedure itself is quick, straightforward, and depending on depending on what time of the month it is, depending on where you are in your cycle, it might be slightly painful.
And there's ways that you can address that kind of pain side of things, isn't it? Because like we said, we can't get away from the fact that the speculum is uncomfortable.
Yes.
However, the more uncomfortable you are, the more tense you get, and the worse it's going to feel. Yeah. So as easy as it is for us to sit here and say that, do try and relax into it.
It's worth repeating though, isn't it? Because it is a case of you do get tense in that situation. Yeah. It's not a comfortable situation.
No.
And it will make things worse if you are tense. So try and relax.
Definitely. And it's about communicating with that practitioner that's doing it as well.
Great point. Yeah.
It really is. There's even, you could take music in your headphones just so that you're not listening to what's going on around you. Once you're in that position, you can whack your headphones in, get it done, and then you're ready to go. You can ask for a smaller speculum, which is really important to point out. If that is really, really uncomfortable, don't feel like you've got to sit through it. You can say, actually, can we start again? Can I have a smaller one?
Absolutely.
And do try and take some deep breaths and speak it through with the nurse. The nurse will do everything they can in their power to help you relax.
100%, yeah. Every single time I've been and had any experience with these kinds of things, the nurses have always been spectacularly helpful in keeping me calm, collected, and getting me through it.
Sometimes they might even crack a little joke.
Yes.
If that's your kind of way of coping, it's great. I've heard many jokes about my cervix in my time on those. So
I'm interested. Maybe we do that bit off mic. Tell me them later.
I'll tell you about my cervix later. So bringing it back around. Once you've finished, once you've closed around and you've left that building, how are you feeling?
Yeah, I think it's done. You've done it. You've ticked it off the to-do list, because let's face it, that's one of them things that always gets put to the bottom of the to-do list.
Oh, yes.
Then you know that you've got a little bit of time to wait for the results to work out what happens next. So I think there's always that kind of, well done, I've done it, I've been. Yeah. Then there's also that kind of thing in the back of your mind where you kind of think, ooh, I know that there's results coming, and I think sometimes that can cause a little bit of anxiety. But I think be proud of yourself because you've been and gone it.
Exactly. The toughest bit's over.
You've gone in and you've got it, you've done it. So let's find out what happens next.
Exactly. And that is the next step in this whole process, isn't it? Is that getting that outcome. The nurse will tell you when you're likely to get your results.
Yeah.
They tend to be the letter in the post, but sometimes it can be a phone call from your GP if there's something that they really want to discuss with you. And it normally takes around 2 to 6 weeks to get those results. Most women have a perfectly normal result, and then the next screen is in 3 to 5 years. So once you've done it, 3 years, you don't have to do anything about it
again. Don't have to think about it again for at least 3 years.
That is totally dependent on their age and where they live, though. I would just like to stress that. So over the years, I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, but what outcomes have you had from your screenings?
Yeah, so like I said, very early on, my first screening that I had when I was around 25, 26 came back with, I think it was looking at the kind of definition of it earlier, which was the positive positive for HPV with abnormal cell result.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, I think they grade it in kind of what it needs to be. So with that, then I had to go back and get treatment for that, which was a colposcopy, where they kind of discovered erosion of the cervix and essentially treated that for me.
Yeah.
Which was quite painful. But that being said, the nurses were absolutely fantastic, and we're not talking about that within, this today, because if I hadn't have had my screening, I wouldn't have known that was, that was happening. And it, touch wood, didn't get any further than me needing to have the colposcopy and have that treated there.
Yeah.
Then after that, I became, it was quite regular. I had to have my screening once every 12 months to kind of maintain and make sure that everything was fine. And then I think on my 29th birthday, just 3 years every year.
Yeah.
My 29th birthday, then it was like, all good, all clear, go back to your normal kind of every 4-year screenings. Since then, I've had my screening every 4 years, and I have had normal results.
Yeah.
Since then, so I'm 36, I think it's been 2 that I've had, but maintained as normal results, which is really lovely. So 2 very different outcomes.
Very different, yeah.
But worth doing. So so I'm now in a situation where I can just have those kind of maintenance ones, the cervical screening once every 4 years. So
And if you hadn't taken control on that very first one,
exactly,
the results could have been very different, couldn't
I was
they?
very lucky that it kind of came about when it did. I became part of the age bracket where I was starting to get the screening stuff come through, and I got a letter saying, make sure you're registering and And so it just came about that happened the way it did. And it was, nerve-wracking and, a bit anxiety-inducing at the time. But if I hadn't had the letter come through about the screening and I hadn't gone for the screening, we don't know what the situation would be like. So, I'm grateful as a woman. Do you know what I mean?
The more we normalise these conversations, the better. Because when it comes to cervical screenings or, any cancer screenings, in fact, there are really specific fears and other barriers that might keep people from going. And I think in this conversation, we have mentioned a few, but let's break some of those down so that people listening might be able to feel a little bit less alone. So I suppose, as simple as it might sound, one of the main reasons why people might not attend is that they intend to go, but they can't find the time. We spoke about it earlier.
Yeah.
Can you relate to that one?
Life gets hectic. Everyone's got good intentions, and then they think, oh no, I need to do something else that's much more important. They prioritize other things. There's work commitments or, family responsibilities.
Yeah.
All those things can really play a part in putting people off kind of doing it, because they just think, oh, it's just not my priority today.
Yeah.
I think as well, it's really hard, especially, with working women, and also when the kids are in school and you're trying to manage a household and, your partnership as well. So you're kind of trying to balance with whomever you might be, doing life with. It's really quite difficult to kind of balance that with a busy schedule and also try and look after your own health.
Yeah.
And also sometimes, it depends on where you're booking your appointment, but if they've not got an appointment available for you when you're free, that then becomes like, oh, well, fine, we'll find something else to do. But obviously the procrastination can lead to missed opportunities for important health checks. So I advise everyone to put it in your WhatsApp groups.
I agree.
Keep reminding each other.
Or your diary.
Keep reminding each other. Tell everyone.
I've got to be
Hold
honest.
yourself accountable, and you can hold each other accountable for it.
When we were kind of starting to talk about cancer and talk about this podcast in the office, and Helen, who's in the audience, she's been leading on this work. I actually admitted to her that I hadn't been to my cervical screening for a while, and I said, oh, you probably should go. And then that held me accountable then, because I could go into Helen in the next few weeks and be like, I did it, I booked it, I've been
in. I love that though, because it is like there's the accountability of not necessarily holding each other accountable, but you feel then like you can hold yourself accountable and be like, oh no, I actually did that. And it's nice that you can bounce that off somebody else. And again, open conversation. You're having an open conversation about something that maybe we weren't necessarily comfortable talking about.
Exactly.
I love that.
And it gave me a chance to celebrate that I'd been an adult and done something properly.
Celebrate the small things.
Exactly.
I love that. I hope you got yourself a sweet treat afterwards.
I did. I treated myself.
Good.
I suppose, and alongside the kind of talking about it, another thing that we as women or anyone that's got a cervix can relate to is that feeling of embarrassment.
Oh, yeah.
It's a really vulnerable situation to be in, and a really intimate one as well. A lot of us maybe don't share that with many people, so it can be a really, really vulnerable time. I'm sure, like a lot of us, you've had similar feelings to that. Can you talk us through it?
Oh my God, absolutely. It's Well, we've already kind of discussed the practicalities of what actually happens within the appointment. And like you say, it's not necessarily the most comfortable situation.
No.
And in those situations, when you are feeling extremely uncomfortable, whomever it might be, there's always the opportunity to kind of request a longer appointment, so that you don't feel like you're being kind of rushed through it. It is a quick appointment and it doesn't take long, but if you're uncomfortable, you're going to be tense, and it's not going to be the most comfortable of experiences. Physically, you have always got the option to take somebody in with you. You can let the team know, and ask for a chaperone if that's something that you would feel more comfortable with. I like to do it, so I've got it kind of early on in the day. So it's done. And it's a nice little tick off my to-do list. Nice and productive for the day. But schedule an early appointment, and then it's done. It's done first thing in the morning, and then you're out if you can do that. I think it's very important to remind everyone that it is okay and quite normal to feel embarrassed with stuff like this. And if you have a chat with the nurses that are in there and let them know how you're feeling, they are so understanding, and they can literally guide you through the process, like the procedure step by step. They can give you hints and tips on how so a bit of breathing, what to do while you're in there, just to kind of relax yourself a little bit. You've got the option to choose to have the test at a sexual health service instead of at your GP. So for example, in Warrington, we have Access, which is Warrington's sexual health service, and we'll provide a link to Access in the show description.
I suppose we've got to talk about the dreaded speculum. What advice can we give to anyone worried about finding that particular procedure painful?
You mentioned it earlier. We've got the option of asking for a smaller speculum if we need one. It does only, take a few minutes, but if you need time whilst the procedure is taking place, you can ask for the time to kind of stop, take a breath, carry on. The majority of my appointments have been absolutely fine. So just, be cautious of that kind of negative rhetoric around these things, because my mum would tell me horror stories, and actually she's just a drama queen. They can, and it really, but it can have an impact on you. You can get, you can fear going into these appointments and not really feel comfortable going into them. But actually, a lot of the time, and the majority of the time, nice and quick, really straightforward, nice and easy. And, if you are really concerned about pain, take some paracetamol and some ibuprofen before
really
you go.
shout.
And also, there's always the option, which we mentioned earlier, about bringing someone with you. If you really are kind of feeling it and it's getting you down, you've got the option to bring a friend or a family member.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think it's really important as well, like when we were talking about being cautious of the negative anecdotes, we as a society are so quick to tell everyone about the bad experience.
Absolutely.
But nobody walks out of their cervical screening and goes, that was amazing, let's go again.
No one's going, oh yeah, can't wait for me next one.
I've got to wait 3 years, are you joking? But there are those times that, it can't just literally go absolutely smoothly. Please don't dwell on the negative. It is so important just to kind of know that your journey is your own and your experience is your own.
100%. Yeah.
Looking at other reasons, an incredibly important one is that, one that can actually be overlooked a lot of the time, is that any sort of individuals with a learning or physical disability might actually find it a little bit more difficult to attend that screening. Is it something that you've ever thought about, considered?
Up until kind of having conversations about coming on this podcast, I think because of the screening and the procedure that the screening is, I think you kind of take it very internally and very kind of focus on you. Those with physical disabilities might face access challenges or need additional support during screenings, which again isn't something that you might necessarily think about straight off the bat. It's really important to discuss any concerns. Definitely worth having that conversation. Be open. If we take anything from today, it's have that open and honest conversation about these things. it may be possible that you can arrange a special appointment, worth considering.
It really is. And I think if you are feeling really worried or concerned that you might not be able to speak up during that appointment, it kind of goes hand in hand with that, taking a chaperone and speaking to your family or friends, someone that you trust, really talk through what your concerns are about that appointment
100%.
And then ask them, if I get there and you feel like I'm not telling them what I need to tell them, please can you speak up on my behalf?
Yeah.
So there are so many options just to make it that little bit easier for you, no matter
100%.
what barriers you're facing.
Yeah. And I think it's a really important point to make, is that there are always ways around or over those barriers.
There is one that is like completely understandable, and it is that if you've had a previous really negative experience, it might cause you to think, I don't actually want to go again. I don't want to go through that again. And I suppose it's a difficult one because every experience is valid.
Yeah, 100%.
And it would be such a tough thing to overcome mentally, I think, if you have had that negative experience and that is stuck in your brain. What advice could we give to someone listening that's in that situation?
We've got to remember every experience is unique, and one negative result doesn't reflect all of the screenings.
No.
But we do tend to talk about the negative ones more so than we do the ones that don't really have anything. You know, it happens, you get your results, and then nothing happens until the next time you need to go and see them.
Yeah.
So sharing those experiences, and also, you know, even sharing them with your doctors and nurses when you get there, and just say, listen, I'm here. However, this has been my previous experience and I'm not very comfortable. They will absolutely talk you through what needs to happen and how they can, or at least offer you some ways to make that more comfortable for you, so that you get it done. Those longer appointments for that kind of situation are perfect, because you can kind of get in there, maybe do a bit of a breathing exercise, maybe kind of, you know, get ready to psych yourself up, however you want to do it. You've got the options there.
Even if everything that we've said on this podcast has gone out of your brain when you get in that room, they will have all of these options as well.
Or you could just listen to us in the waiting room.
You could.
Yeah, have this podcast on while you're waiting to go in, and then you'll know.
You'll exactly what you're walking in. Exactly.
Maybe then you will come out of there doing cartwheels.
Maybe that will be our influence on the world.
Oh, God.
Oh, Steph, thank you so much for weighing in on those. I think it's really important for our listeners to know that they're not alone in their thinking or the situation, but hopefully now someone might feel a little bit more inclined to make that appointment, because it is so important, isn't it?
It is so important. I thank you so much for having me and letting me waffle on. I hope, like you just said, that somebody takes something away from it, even if it is just a case of going, you know what, actually, I am going to have a chat with my girlfriends, or you know what, I'm going to make that longer appointment so that I can have a really open and honest discussion about how this makes me feel. Whatever it is that anyone takes away from this podcast, fingers crossed you take something away. But I'm just so pleased that we got to have this chat, and I think it's been really do you know what, considering we've been talking about cervical screenings, I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. Really had a nice time.
Oh no, thank you so much. It has meant the world to me just having this conversation with you today and helping normalize this little area of our lives.
That's the one.
So sadly, our time on this episode of Chat Cancer Podcast has come to an end. Steph, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experiences with us. We're really thankful. I hope this has been a positive experience for you.
Absolutely. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. And thank you once again to our live audience. I really hope that if you're listening and you're eligible for cervical screening, our conversation today has encouraged you to make that appointment or to continue to make those appointments. The NHS have already set an ambitious target of eliminating cervical cancer within the next 2 decades. But in order to make this a reality, we need more women to come forward for their screenings when they're invited. Even if you've previously missed an appointment, don't wait around 3 years for another one. Just ring your GP as soon as you can and book in now. It's one of the best things you can do for your own future health, and it might even save your life. Steph, is there anything you'd like to say that we haven't covered yet?
Get on them WhatsApp groups, girls. Send everyone a reminder this afternoon and tell them, have you had yours done?
I would love that if when this podcast goes out, there's a flurry of new WhatsApp groups started all of this.
Love that. Love that.
And don't forget, if you are showing any symptoms mentioned earlier in the podcast, please contact your GP as soon as you can. And for more information or to learn more about other resources, visit the NHS Cervical Screenings website, which we will have linked in the bio as well. You can also find support and information through local cervical cancer programs or cancer alliances near you. Thanks for tuning in to Chat Cancer. Please stay chatty and let's keep those important conversations going. And we'll be back with another episode soon. But until then, take care, look after yourself, and don't hesitate to take action when it comes to booking your cervical screening.